All right, so a few people are still coming in. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisette Martinez. I'm the Network and Learning Coordinator here at the National Guild. Thank you for joining us today for our Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass series. You can refer to me in conversation by name or by she, her, hers. I am a light-skinned person with some neutral undertones and sometimes some pink undertones. I have dark brown eyes and thick, dark eyebrows. I have a pear-shaped face with full cheeks. I have dark shoulder length hair with some green highlights throughout. Today, I'm wearing a black sweater that has a pattern of green and orange moths on it. And I have some white walls behind me. I'm joined today by an incredible group of speakers who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. I am meeting with you from the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape and Canarsie people. I ask you to join me in honoring these First Peoples, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. I ask you to join me in honoring these First Peoples, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. Let's say that again. The National Guild also recognizes that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including the Lenape on whose land the institution is located. I also acknowledge the trauma that colonialism caused both Indigenous and enslaved African people, not only through slavery, biological warfare, forced sterilization, and forced assimilation, but via structural racism, which allows these racist systems to continue to oppress their descendants today. We honor those who have lived and are living at these intersections of identity and experience. This acknowledgement is a commitment to beginning the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now, the Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass Dialogue Series is a series of 75-minute-long, intimate fishbowl conversations with 6 BIPOC-led arts organizations that center anti-racism in organizational mission and practice. Your video, audio, and chat is disabled. If you want to send love or if you want to send questions to our speakers, you can use the Q&A box in your toolbar. However, these are fishbowl conversations, and so we may get to 1 or 2 questions if time allows. Each of our conversations, including today's, will be facilitated by Masharika Prejean Maddison, founder of Lightwell Coaching and Consulting. Our follow-up reflection sessions will be led by Toya Lillard, Executive Director of Vibe Theater Experience. Reflection sessions provide deeper co-learning, and Toya is just an amazing facilitator, so I hope you all will find time to come to the session tomorrow. It will be at 1 p.m. Eastern, and I will send a registration link in the chat box. And so today, we will hear from Lolly Bowean and Tempestt Hazel from Field Foundation of Illinois. We are being supported by Pro Bono ASL. Rorri, Burton, and Selena Flowers will be our ASL and English interpreters today. And this virtual learning series is brought to you by the Music Man Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. All right, so my script is done. So let's send some good energy to our team today. And I will pass it to Masharika to get us started.
Thank you, Lisette. Good morning, good afternoon, good day. I am Masharika Prejean Maddison. I am coming to you from Washoe Land in Northern California, known currently as Lake Tahoe. I use she, her pronouns. Behind me today, I'm sitting in front of, I should say, a window with some beautiful pine trees and some snow flurries because it is still full on winter time. In my background also, I am sharing space with some young learners. My 7-year-old coworker is nearby, and you might hear his voice from time to time today. I am wearing a purple thermal shirt, and I'm also being warmed by a nice blue puffy vest. I hope that it does not interfere with my audio, my microphone at any point. I have caramel colored skin. I wear glasses to support my vision. And as always, that big grin is on my face because I'm so excited for this conversation that we are about to have with Tempestt and Lolly. The final thing that I will say before turning it over to Tempestt is that this conversation is not happening in a vacuum. We are very much experiencing a world around us. And just this past week, there was a shift in our presidential power. And we might be having feelings about that. We might be bouncing back from the events of the past month, 4 years, a lifetime, who knows? But I want to be clear that this conversation is not divorced from the life that we are all leading. So please share your questions as you're listening to this fishbowl conversation. I invite you to contextualize it in this present moment that we are in. And we're all in this together, y'all. We're all in this together. Tempestt, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and Lolly, if you wouldn't mind following Tempestt, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Thank you for that. I'm actually, if it's okay, I'm going to turn it over to Lolly to give Chicago's land acknowledgement before I introduce myself.
Thank you, Tempestt. I'm Lolly Bowean. I'll go ahead and do my introduction. I have milk chocolate colored skin. My face is the shape of an apple. I have locks like Bob Marley that are pulled back into a bun. I am wearing a red sweater. I am surrounded by cream-colored walls, one of which has an orange-colored image of Louis Armstrong playing his trumpet behind me. And I'm very grateful to be here today. Tempestt and I both are joining you from the unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes also called our area home. The region has long been a center for indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States resides in Chicago. Our city, Chicago, was founded by a Haitian immigrant who was a fur trader. His name is John Baptiste du Sable. In the past 5 years, he has been acknowledged with a bridge and a bust in our downtown area, acknowledging him as the first person to set up trade and business in our city. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Tempestt for her introduction.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tempestt Hazel. I have medium brown skin, short black hair, natural hair, curly hair. My face is oval shaped. I have brown eyes, and I'm wearing orangish, brownish, thick-rimmed glasses and a dark blue shirt and headphones. And behind me is a wooden bookshelf that has publications on several of my favorite artists and writers, including Octavia Butler, Carrie James Marshall, Colleen Smith, and many others. And very glad to be here.
Thank you again, Tempestt and Lolly, for being with us today. If y'all are open to it, can we talk? Okay. perhaps to give our growing audience, I see the numbers continuing to climb. Um, would you give us an idea of the pillars of society upon which the Field Foundation was created? And just to really speak to the longevity of the foundation as well, how, if at all, has the foundation's grant making focus shifted between its origins and now? So how did it all begin? What were those pillars of society that really informed its beginnings, and how, if at all, has grant making shifted over time?
So this is Tempestt speaking. So last year was actually Field Foundation's 80th year. So there was a lot of reflecting happening simultaneously as everything was happening around us. And Angelique Power, Field Foundation's current president, when reflecting on the origins of the Field Foundation, she said that Field Foundation was born from the mind of Marshall Field III in an attempt to equip the organizer, the artist, and the truth teller with everything that they need for the fight. And so that fight includes things that are social, economic, cultural, across the board, and really truly transcends those terms. And so for 80 years, Field has been working in that way to directly support communities through grant making. A lot of its work historically has been focused on direct service, arts education, overhead funds, and other support to address community needs. And today, in a lot of ways, Field is definitely perhaps a more refined version of itself as it's evolved over the past 80 years. So I think the current program areas, which are relatively new, and the big shift in our grant making focus to explicitly call out things like racial equity, it is really, you can really see that within our program areas now. So we have art, justice, media and storytelling, and leadership investment. And those, are just evolutions of, a kind of fertile ground that was already there from Field's founding, and from some of the values that were kind of carried through the life and the work of Marshall Field III specifically. He has I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but I remember last year too, in preparation of the 80th year, Angelique found his biography, and she would share with us bits from it. And it just really, it was uncanny in a lot of ways how it directly spoke to the way that Field has manifested today. So yeah, I'll stop there.
If I can jump in here, I'll just add to what Tempest has said. Again, the Field Foundation was founded a little over 80 years ago, and it was created as a response to the conditions of the Great Depression and how the Great Depression was impacting the Midwest. But it was also founded on a mission of racial equity. The founder was an integrationist and really believed in trying to uplift the entire city as a whole. For people who don't know about Chicago or who have never been here, our city is unique in that it's broken down into about 1/3 African American, 1/3 Latino or Latinx, Latin American, and Caucasian American or white people. And so I believe that Marshall Field, as a founder, wanted to ensure that there was lifting of the entire city together, and that there was equity, and that wealth benefits didn't lean to one side of town, but we saw that it has. And over time, I think that the foundation has evolved to be more specific in its mission to trying to ensure that the resources that are issued in a way that really center justice, equality, and equity in our city.
maybe we can do a bit of a deeper dive on that specificity, Lolly, that you were just speaking about. Um, and in particular, the specificity of the types of grant making that you all engage in. The mission of the Field Foundation is to center racial equity to achieve community empowerment through justice, art, media and storytelling, and leadership investment. That's pretty specific there when we think about where these resources are being funneled. Um, so, how, if at all, does having this dedicated space for art and media and for storytelling, respectively, really help to increase racial equity? And because I have the two portfolio holders with me today, I'm also hoping that you can share some specific stories about the community impact of there being a specific art portfolio and a specific media and storytelling portfolio at the foundation.
Lolly, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure, I can. And I'll be speaking about media and storytelling because that's the area where I am most focused. So, in full disclosure, the Field family were involved in the founding of the Chicago Sun-Times, which is one of our city's mainstream and major newspapers. So, the founders of this philanthropic organization recognized very early on the importance of a free press, the importance of storytellers, and the importance of a media that covered the city. And so there's been a long history of the Field Foundation supporting media and storytelling efforts and ensuring that there is a narrative that promotes and supports justice, but that accurately reflects the people who live here. In recent years, in just 2019, the foundation decided that it would start the media and storytelling portfolio so that it could really do a deeper dive or a deeper investment in media and storytelling. And so Tempest will tell you that again, for 80 years, there's been investments in media and storytelling, generally through the arts portfolio. But now there is a sort of dedicated fund toward it. And part of that is in response to this narrative that had taken over the nation, if not the world, about Chicago. And Chicago simply being dismissed and couched in one dominant narrative that I won't even raise here. We all know, right? We all know that the former occupant of the White House, for example, had highlighted Chicago for very specific reasons, and that the name Chicago had become code. Well, almost in a response to seeing how the world was responding to this one note, very singular narrative, the media and storytelling portfolio was founded. And the mission is to empower the organizations that we know are doing the work toward ensuring that there is a balanced and nuanced story and stories about our city. We recognize that there are historically overlooked communities, overlooked by the mainstream media, overlooked by philanthropy too. But in those communities, there have long been newspapers, digital publications, documentary filmmakers, people who are podcasters and podcast personalities, even radio stations that have filled the information gap and told the stories of of a community of Chicago, not just again, the highlight of this is how many people have been killed, or this is the crime of the day. And so the purpose of this portfolio in many ways is to help empower those organizations and to partner with those organizations to ensure that they are able to do their work and do their work more stably. Now, you'll probably notice I'm being careful and trying to be as thoughtful as I can with how I am conveying this. And that's because it's important to note that the way that we approach this work is not work as, quote, charity. This is not gifts. This is an investment because we want to partner with these organizations because in many ways we want to be not just supportive of their work, but we want to be a beneficiary of their progress. We want to be in the struggle and in the fight with them. And that's where we position ourselves, by keeping our eyes on communities that are historically overlooked, but that we recognize have been empowering themselves for more than 80 years, right? More than the existence of this foundation. And so how does that manifest? One is we have a heat map that helps us identify the communities that, again, have most often been overlooked by philanthropy and particularly our investments. But then we also have set goals for ourselves to statistically ensure that we are investing those dollars in communities that are about what we say we're about. So essentially, that values, that's results, that progress aligns with the values we say that we are about. Tempest?
For the arts portfolio, I think having a portfolio that's dedicated to the arts in Chicago has allowed Field to dive more deeply into some of the nuances of what we mean when we say art, and how we're able to support art in ways that perhaps aren't typical. And also, one of the really important parts of the art portfolio is this idea of wanting to explode how we define art, and really trying to broaden that, necessarily because a lot of the communities that we're talking about have historically been kind of shut out of mainstream definitions of culture and cultural canon. So thinking about the ways in which the art portfolio can be a direct reflection of the communities as Lali described them, you know, art looks different. And in a lot of ways, it's not necessarily just about the artistic production. It's about the process, the art of the process of creating organizations, creating collections or collectives, creating institutions. There's so much more to it. There are different models and methodologies and ways of doing things. And I think the art portfolio seeks to honor that, and to be expansive in a way of being able to, as Lali said, partner with these communities through these organizations, through artists, and listen very closely to what it is that they're doing, and learn from them, and have what they're doing inform how we shape our grant making, and our values, and the priorities that we have. So in a lot of ways, for me, the art portfolio is a reflection of what I've heard. We are in a lot of ways just conduits for what those communities are trying to do, and what they need, and what they, a kind of self-determination that we encourage, because we don't pretend as coming from a foundation, as if we're, empowerment is a complicated word, I think. And for us, it's not about us giving power to anyone. We, especially, many of the program officers at Field are folks who were not career grant makers. So this is, I think, for all four of us program officers, this is our first time in philanthropy. We come from the field. So we are in and of a lot of these communities, and working in these communities in dynamic ways. So we kind of bring that to our portfolios. And that to me, I mean, when you set up when you kind of set up the foundation of the work, with all of those things in mind, and knowing that you're bringing in and thinking about and considering, and are just a conduit for other folks, it leads to questions and problem solving, and testing out of things, and trying out things, and redefinitions kind of organically. So for us, and concretely, just to kind of like put some thoughts to that for the art portfolio, so you can see what it looks like in action. Like, we are thinking about the creation of work, because cultural production is at the heart of any kind of art, right? But at the same time, we're thinking about the working conditions and living wages of artists. We're thinking about the structures that perhaps aren't nonprofit structures that are supporting communities in other ways, and alternative models that are solidarity models of operations and survival models of operations and really community rooted models. So we're thinking beyond your typical, perhaps like museum or theater venue, and looking at the ways that that happens within community that might look different from what we're accustomed to. Also thinking about the ways in which artists are truly organizers. A lot of the activists and the folks in a lot of the movements and a lot of the work happening at a community level, many of them are artists. So thinking about really kind of blurring a lot of lines necessarily, because that's how it actually looks like in action. That's how it looks like that's what it looks like on the ground. So we work to kind of make our portfolios speak to that and be responsive to that.
Tempest, that was so well put. I found myself over here looking for the emojis so I could give you some applause because it was so good. If I could add, Masharika, one of the things you asked for was some specific anecdotes. And what comes to mind for the media and storytelling portfolio most immediately is that, again, our portfolio is seeking to invest in organizations that shift that dominant narrative, that shift that mainstream narrative, and make sure that it's reflective of the entire city of Chicago. Well, in the summer of 2020, during the uprisings, a story, no, I'm sorry, this was actually during the quarantine, in the early days of the quarantine. A story that got some national attention from the city of Chicago was when a group of teenagers got together on the west side of Chicago and had a party during this pandemic and during the shutdown. Our city was on complete lockdown, and the mayor had asked people to stay at home and stay indoors as much as possible to avoid COVID exposure. Well, TMZ did a report essentially kind of chastising this group of African American young people who had gotten together for a house party. And that story, as you can imagine, went viral, went national. Well, it took one of our grantee partners, a media organization called The Tribe, which has steeped itself in covering Black Chicago, to write a story that actually tracked down the young people who were at that party and talked to them about why they got together during the quarantine, why they, felt like it was acceptable for them to gather, even though there were this directive from the city and from the mayor's office. And what they learned in their reporting is that there was a gap in the communication that was reaching young African American and Latinx residents in our city. That this was not an attempt to rebel against what had been issued as an order. This was simply a group of people who were not being reached, right, by city leaders, in part because they've been overlooked, ignored, and dismissed for so long. In addition, what had driven these young people to gather was that they were celebrating the life of one of their friends and classmates. So this was a part of a mourning ritual. This was not a typical house party in the way that it was portrayed. What we saw is that after the tribe lifted this story, again, that actually quoted the people who were there and the people who organized and put this together, after they lifted this story up, the entire mainstream dominant media narrative changed. Then we saw other reporters from larger outlets scrambling to duplicate this type of coverage, which was done by a small, at the time, 3-person newsroom. but a newsroom that has made it a priority to speak to people and interview people who have constantly been overlooked and dismissed, people who have been talked about but not talked to. And so these are the type of investments and the type of change that we want to be a part of, is being a part of the people who are on the ground, grassroots, who are given the microphone, so to speak, to the people who are doing the work, right? We want to be a part of those types of organizations, be invested and on the ground with them. And so we're so proud to say that we were one of the first foundations to invest in the tribe. And since then, there have been a lot of organizations that have followed, but Field was on the ground, one of the first ones to say, we will take a quote unquote risk because we know it's not a risk.
These are all such concrete examples of how you're putting your resources into action. Much to my children's chagrin, one of the things I tell them daily, if not hourly, is the stories we tell ourselves matter. And in listening to the both of you, I realized, oh, that's right. The stories we tell each other also matters because it reinforces these notions of who we are and who we aren't, and people who look like this, believe this certain thing, and act this certain way. And I can really see through your examples just how clear you all are in ensuring that the stories that Chicagoans is telling fellow Chicagoans and the nation at large really matters, really matters. And not just through the media, but also through the arts. I love, Tempestt, what you said about opening the doors to the cultural canon as well, and redefining what art, what means, what it looks like, the process involved in it. Again, the stories we tell each other really deeply matter. And what I also know is that behind this amazing grant making are two incredible humans, the two of you. The grant making can only go as far as the people behind it. So I would love to center your leadership with this next question. Based on your respective experiences of working within the system of philanthropy, what would you individually recommend that the institution stop doing, start doing, and continue doing with regard to cultivating anti-racist practices?
This is Tempest. I will get it started, and then I'm sure Lally and I might riff off of each other on this one. But one of the things that at the first thing I think about is history. You have to know the history of how money moves and how philanthropy has existed and what it was born from within this country in order to truly understand what you need to do at your own organization. Because I think that knowing that history lets you know where it comes into direct conflict with ideas of anti-racism, and where it perpetuates different racist practices or anti-Blackness or a certain lexicon of terms or rubric that tends to just systemically shut out certain groups that have been historically shut out of a lot of resources that come through philanthropy. So I think, when I think about the criteria that's used to evaluate organizations, those need to be rethought. When I think about the lexicon, even Lolly mentioned the word risk, which is a word that is tossed around a lot in philanthropy. That, when you're talking about certain communities, is used in a certain way that is ultimately problematic because, as Lolly said, those of us who are in and of those communities know that if you're investing in those communities, it's actually not a risk. You're actually doing something that will inevitably, because these are communities that, like phrases like make a dollar out of 15 cents come from these communities. So you're actually, by investing in them, risk dissolves, or I just struggle with terms like that, that are coded, like what Lally said before. There's a lot of coded language that needs to be done away with, rethought, questioned, interrogated, in order for us to get to, philanthropy is a hard mountain to climb. And I think knowing the history, interrogating the lexicon, interrogating the practices are a start.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And again, I'm just nodding and clapping over here at Tempest. This is Lolly speaking. If I could add on, to the part about risk, when I think about a specific example, one of the things, well, let me rewind. One of the benefits of being at Field is that we start out at an organization that has already centered racial and social justice as its mission. So in some ways, we have an advantage because we are in an organization that is already starting where a good number of organizations are just starting to crack open the book. But so then being within the organization, though, it forces us as members of a community that really know how these processes work, that really know what it's like to come up against a system, not be assisted by a system, but to have a confrontational relationship with systems. Well, it forces us within the organization to interrogate and really think introspectively about even our values. And how we are applying those values. So just as Tempest said, what does it mean to use the word risk? One of the organizations that we support is the Chicago Crusader. In order to support them in a number of African American led and owned, in Latinx led and owned organizations, we had to figure out ways that we could do grant making to for-profit organizations. Because forcing organizations to kind of constrict or bend to the way that we want them to look is not going to be effective if we really want to reach the people that we say we want to reach. But I raised the Chicago Crusader because the same time that Field was being founded as a foundation, that newspaper was being founded. So this newspaper, which is black owned and has been black owned for 80 plus years, has found a way to survive and thrive on the south side of Chicago. So when you tell me that we're making an investment in them and that's a quote risk, it's, the question becomes, well, how? Because if anyone has figured out how to weather the storm, and there have been lots of media storms, it is an organization like this one. And if they are nimble, if they are flexible, if they are prolific, if they are innovative, then it's my and Tempest's job to not only recognize that, but to emulate it in how we approach our grant making. And also being sensitive, right? That a good number of organizations don't want to fold to a nonprofit model because it's important in our communities, in Black, Brown, BIPOC communities, that you are an entrepreneur, not set up on a model that appears that you are seeking charity or that you are reliant upon charity, right? So again, if what we are working to do is to be arm in arm with these organizations, then it's not on us to tell them how to be flexible. It's on us to be flexible to them.
I'm taking copious notes over here. If I might summarize, and by summarizing, I know that I will not do full justice to the fullness of what you shared, but let me just share what I did write down with all of my notes. In terms of some concrete practices that you all are promoting, which come from that deeper reflection of, all right, y'all, what do we need to start, stop, and continue in the space of philanthropy? I heard you say, we need to follow the dollars and its impact. And that's across a longer timeline of how dollars have been spent and the subsequent impacts that have been achieved. I heard you say we've got to be really disciplined and diligent about interrogating our lexicon. The words that we use within philanthropy are sending messages and ultimately telling stories about the role of philanthropy, the power that it is perceived to hold, etc. There's also an opportunity to reevaluate how you define success and reevaluate what performance looks like. Also, an urgent need to redefine what we mean by risk. And the examples that you shared of the two publications are just one or two of many I know that we could come up with on this call and in this conversation. Really throwing risk out the window in support of reorienting. I love this one, and I'm going to be thinking about this one for a while. Reorienting the directionality of the invitation. It's not about philanthropy saying, hey, you organization, we think you are great, and we know, organization, that you need us. Philanthropy would not exist without the organization ever having been in existence. So understanding the bidirectional and symbiotic nature of these institutions, both organization and philanthropy, is so important to hold up. And finally, I heard you say we have an opportunity to interrogate our values and our economic models. That is not, it is not so simple to say, I'm going to be a nonprofit because that's the easiest path forward, especially for a leader or a founder who wants to be entrepreneurial in spirit for all of the reasons that they may want to. So how do we redefine our values and expand our economic models to make it possible for collaboration? All right, what's coming up for y'all as you hear that recounting of my notes?
Yeah, no, I think that was a great summary of it. Yeah, that was really great. And from Lolly's example, I think too about, uh, if we're talking about just like mining fields with organizations that in Chicago that were founded around the same time, I think about in Chicago, there's the Southside Community Arts Center, which is the oldest WPA era art center that was created. That's still in its original building. And one of the founders, Dr. Margaret Burroughs, there's stories of her standing on the street collecting coins and dollars from the community in order to get it started. Her and the co-founders being out in the streets and getting money directly from people to get it started. So there's a whole different kind of support system that happens within these communities that I think is really important to recognize. And what Lally is too saying, I think about, well, what you said about foundations just don't exist. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship. I think within the arts, we pull that forward too. Within the arts portfolio, I try to think about that too. And in my own work, because art, cultural institutions, all of these things, they don't exist without the artists. So making sure that we recognize and understand that the well-being of our artists is key. It is essential. It is absolutely critical to our collective survival and well-being.
Can we take a breath on that? Can we give ourselves a moment to stretch, to be in our bodies to the extent that we feel safe and able to in this moment? These are powerful words, and the two of you are incredibly thoughtful and inspiring leaders. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. As you're in your community, as you're in the work, I'd love to hear more about how you think about possibility, and in particular, what are some of the guiding lights that you try to hone in on when identifying potential arts communities to support or potential media and storytelling communities to support? What are some of those guiding lights that you're looking for? What are the things that are exciting you? And again, I'm so excited to hear what you're going to say, because these are the things that will push us to think beyond traditional models of success that are often supported through philanthropy. So the floor is yours, whoever wants to start us off. What are some of the guiding lights that are exciting y'all?
You know, if I can hop in here, and I get the question, but I do want to just acknowledge for a moment and thank you for your thanks to our quote wisdom. But, you know, I just feel like I would be remiss to take credit for the direction that we go in. We are, I think, incredibly blessed to work in a community among artists and writers and journalists and storytellers that imagine a new Chicago. And they are working toward a vision that has not even been seen yet. And so their radical imaginations push us to think radically in how we approach the work. And so, in many ways, it's seeing the people who are doing the actual work on the ground that we want to partner with. They're the ones, as they raise questions and they approach what a liberated society look like, and what a just Chicago looks like, and what a Chicago for us all looks like. And as they throw out the historical examples that have only failed us, right? That forces us to do the same. So again, we come into an organization that already has this social justice mission. We could pat ourselves on the back. But again, working with these people, it forces us to even interrogate our own ways of thinking, our own ways of approaching. And so at least, you know, I think it forces us to think even further about, well, who's here at the table? Even though our table looks like a superficial reflection of Chicago, meaning that we got BIPOC people at the table, right? But are we really representing all the layers of classes? Are we really reaching our LGBTQIA? Are we really reaching the differently abled community? Are we aggressively going after the people who continue to be marginalized even within, you know, the umbrella of being identified as BIPOC, or we call them Alana, right? And so it forces us to interrogate even more. It forces us to think about even more, how do we reach organizations and people who have intentionally decided that they don't want to work within this system, right? I often say and ask people to give us some grace, because Tempestt and I and our entire staff, we work within the system. We didn't make the system, right? And so we're within it, trying to use it as a tool to invest and uplift, and again, partner with people who are doing this work in our community. But what about the people who have decided that for intentional reasons, they don't want to, quote, bank? They don't want to have a, quote, board. They don't want to have an elected leader or CEO. They want their organization to be a leaderless organization that is at the will of all the people. So again, as we see them move, it forces us to challenge how we do our work. And so in many ways, they deserve all the credit. So I just want to, you know, say that. And I guess if there is a guiding light, that's what becomes the guiding light, right? Is seeing that tide of momentum swell and wanting to be a part of it. Because as Tupac said, the great scholar Tupac, the old way wasn't working. So it's on us to do what we got to do. And so again, if we've seen the old system failing us, then it's up to us to see how we can respond with a new vision, and with this new vision that's being presented to us. Does that make sense?
This is Tempest, and I have absolutely nothing to add to what Lally said, because that was perfection. I mean, I just echo all of that. What we do, again, I mean, oftentimes when I have conversations with the different organizations and the people from the organizations that we support, and they show gratitude for field support, it's like, I don't know what you think we did. We just saw your light, you know, like that's a very low bar to clear. So it really is, they are the guiding light. And I say they, but I also feel the need to say we, because it's so interchangeable in a lot of ways, as I mentioned, because these are the communities that we are a part of as well. So it's yeah, it's so, giving credit where credit is due is very, very important. And the communities, the folks doing the work, a lot of these writers, journalists, artists, cultural workers, yeah, they are our North Star.
This is a bit of a put you on the spot sort of follow-up question. Are there any particular artists, collaboratives, collectives, organizations that you might lift up as examples of entities that are engaging in the arts, engaging in storytelling, engaging in media on their own terms, so that our audience, if they want to do a bit more research on their own, might be able to?
Ooh, that's so hard. I mean,
This list is by no means conclusive. Let me be clear. Let me be clear. This is an on-the-spot question.
Yeah, I mean, there are several, but I will, you know, for the sake of where we're at, and this moment in time, I feel the need to call out the arts organizations that are doing like really important community organizing work and community care work. So I think about groups like Grassroots Collaborative, Alt Space Chicago. I think about Circles and Ciphers. These are some groups that are doing a lot of community care through mutual aid and really interesting projects that are like taking care of large groups of folks that are not necessarily getting everything that they need in this moment. I also would want to lift up Brave Space Alliance, which is the only trans-led, Black-led organization that is serving Black and Brown LGBTQIA community in Chicago and located on the South Side, and feeding thousands upon thousands of people monthly, and also serving artists directly as well. I think about Blueton Production Cooperative, which is an immigrant and refugee woman-run fashion manufacturing house that's cooperatively owned. So they own it together, they get the benefits and make all the decisions. And For the People Artists Collective, like there are just so many. Also, I can't not mention the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, because in this conversation about memorials and monuments across the country, they, for 10 years, more than 10 years, have been working through an arts lens to get one of a very historic reparations ordinance passed in Chicago. So that was artists and activists and torture survivors that were at the front of that fight, working together, and made really incredible historic work happen here in Chicago. And I could go on, and there's a whole list of over 80 organizations that are in my portfolio. So I want to call them all out, but I'll stop and pass it to Lolly.
And for those who are named and those who are not, we appreciate their contributions. Thank you so much for sharing the names that you have.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation as Tempest, where there's just such a long list. Earlier, I mentioned the tribe, and I think about Cicero Independiente. I think about Borderless and Ergo. These are organizations, these are media organizations that were started by young people of color who saw that there were stories about their communities that were not being told. They saw that there was a news and information gap, that stories needed to be translated into Spanish, and they just picked up the baton and started from the ground up when few people believed in them. And many of them started at a time and within a media ecosystem where it had long been taught and believed that if you wanted to make a difference, you needed to go and work within what already existed. But these minds were brilliant and very pioneering, and started just simply by serving their communities. When I think about the founders of Systematic Podcasts, for example, or OTV or Block Club Chicago. So again, the list is so long. I also think about Ashley O'Shea, one of our documentary filmmakers, who now has a film out called Unapologetic, which helps to chronicle some of the Black feminist voices that started and were on the front lines for the Black Lives Matter movement. And she started chronicling this story more than 4 years ago, long before it was of interest of the mainstream, right? When these were young women who were going out, putting their physical selves and physical bodies on the line, and possibly being called crazy for doing it. And so we had the uprisings of 2020. And now the question comes, who are these people? Well, Ashley has given them an answer. We have Sisters in Cinema, started by a woman, a Black woman on the south side of Chicago, who too is opening a media center and saying that there should be films made, broadcasts, elevated about our community, whether the mainstream documentary film industry believes in it or not. And just as Tempest mentioned with Dr. Burroughs, this is a woman who is scraping together through small investments from her community in an effort to get this done. So I hope that the audience who is listening today get a sense that the people that we are partnering with are people who have a deep love, devotion, and commitment to community. And one of the great things about supporting these efforts is that so many times we have to say and, remind our partners, our superiors, so to speak, that these are people that are going to do it anyway. They're not waiting for us to get on to get on our bus. We're trying to get on their bus. We're trying to catch up with them and their radical thinking, their radical efforts, and their radical work. And it is such an honor because this is not people who are thinking about doing things. They are doing it. It is being done. So again, it's with or without us. So yeah, the list is just so long. I do want to say we got a comment from Duffy, and I just want to thank Duffy for his thanks. And Kalita Jones, who's out there, thank you. We see you. We appreciate your comments.
Can
Right
I just
on.
add, can I add one more thing to that?
You can
This
add
is
as many
Tempest.
things as you would like, my friend.
I mean, the other thing that I would be, that I have to call out simply because we're with a group of folks that are deeply invested in arts education, community arts education, is that in a lot of ways, many of the organizations within my portfolio, whether it's stated explicitly or is kind of just baked in, are really value the vision and the ideas and just the brilliance of young people. And I think that that is a very important thing that we need to call out too, because even though Field doesn't have a dedicated program in arts education specifically, there's so much of our work that's informed and inspired by the work that young folks are doing right now. So I just want to give a shout out to that, because in a lot of ways, the past year, we would be much worse off if it weren't for the brilliance and the relentless fight of young folks, especially here in Chicago.
Can we center on the brilliance and the relentless fight of the young folks of Chicago in our next question? And maybe we'll extend beyond young folks, but nevertheless, the relentlessness piece, I hope that we can center. Thinking about entities, and I'm using that term broadly, from a single individual to a collective or a co-op, whatever it might be. So thinking about the experience of an entity that is actively seeking to push away from or to disrupt these culturally white dominant philanthropic structures, but at the same time as they're creating distance from, are seeking funding from these institutions. When we think about these types of entities, what wisdom do you have for these types of entities that do want to sustain and grow their efforts, but do it on their terms?
This is Tempestt speaking. So that's such an interesting question. The advice that I have, and it's hard for me to give advice because I feel like a lot of everything that I say is informed by other people. But I think that if this past year tells us anything, it's that the institutions or, philanthropy, it will see, like, if you hold true to your own values and what you believe and how you do things, and keep that just steady and at your core, folks catch up. I think this past year has been a glowing example of the ways in which a lot of the institutions that have not supported a lot of the communities that Field supports got a wake-up call and really scramble to kind of change things about themselves, how they were thinking about funding, resources, who they were considering, who was or wasn't part of their networks and their grantee pools. That all shifted overnight, and necessarily. And I won't say overnight because it definitely was a much longer process than that. But really relative to the ways in which we understand philanthropy to change, it felt like it was overnight, because the things that have happened over the past year are things that take years and years and even decades to change within these kinds of institutions. So to me, it's never about, as Lali said before, bending to the requirements or the frames or the boxes of these institutions. It's really holding on to what you know of who you are and what is needed and your knowledge. Because at the end of the day, I like to think that philanthropy will catch up. Or it will get a wake-up call, or there are folks that will do some calling out and for some reckonings, as we've seen. But then too, my other advice would be, I think it's important to think about the leverage that is created through the knowledge that community-based organizations have, because in a lot of ways, we're having refreshed conversations that are long conversations that have been around for a long time around things like reparations and understanding the things that, in a lot of ways, the things that have been taken from and kept from certain communities that need to be redistributed. So we think about things like divest, invest, and redistribution of wealth, and those types of things are conversations that are very much people are gaining a better understanding of, and how that sits within the history of this country. So I think that being able to kind of sit in your truth, sit in your knowledge and your experience and what you know, and holding firm to that is always the best move, because I think that the past year has taught us a lot as far as what communities know, how resilient they are, and how in a lot of ways, many of the communities and organizations that Field has supported and what we've seen happen over the past year, resilience is one of the words of the year. But they've been operating in a way that has prepared them for, nothing could have prepared us for what has happened over the past year. But in a lot of ways, they have been they have been working and building the structures and the knowledge and the processes and the ways of being in and with and caring for community that made them meet this moment in a very different way, in a way that has inspired folks around the world to in a way that we know what the term mutual aid means. We have a different understanding of that. A year and a half ago, you would say mutual aid and many people probably would be like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? So I think we're just in a new day, and a new time. And there's a way in which these communities are the teachers, and that is within the rooms and the Zoom rooms, the physical rooms, the spaces, the institutions of philanthropy are learning from them. So my advice would be just to kind of hold firm.
I love seeing the affection and physical affirmation that you're getting over there. I just absolutely agree with Tempest and don't have much more to add to that. I will say, to be transparent, that we have conversations within Field about organizations that appear to be bending toward what they think is our will, right, in order to get a certain amount of favor. And we discourage that. We encourage that organizations and individuals know who their audience is, and as Tempest said, stand firm to your own values. We recognize that work has to be empowered sometimes by funding. But historically, again, there's so many communities that have been neglected, that have been overlooked, not just by philanthropy, but even by city dollars. But yet, we still have a Southside Community Arts Center. But yet, we still have a Chicago Defender. But yet, we still have a DuSable Museum, right? And so there are examples of organizations that have been able to thrive and create their own economic model outside of philanthropy. And so I would say use those organizations almost as a model, right, for what can be created without reliance upon field or philanthropy, period. And once you do that, as Tempest has said, then you have people kind of chasing after you because your vision, your dedication, your scaffolding is so strong, your foundation is built so well that who wouldn't want to walk arm in arm with you?
I mean, we could leave the conversation right here, and we still have about 3 or so more minutes. So why don't we leave the conversation? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Lolly.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, since we had a couple minutes left, that there
Yeah.
was a question about the heat map and the way that we approach our heat map. If you
Yes.
want to learn more, we've placed it in the chat. Lizette put it in the chat so that you could go on our website and see an image of the way that our heat map kind of identifies communities that are of importance to us. And we use that as a part of our investment strategy. And so essentially what we've done is through consulting firm, and I wasn't here, so I can't take credit for this, but what Field has done is created a map of the city of Chicago that really looked intensely at the philanthropic investments of the racial makeup and demographics of these communities, the sources of jobs, wealth, and just a factor of demographic information. And we've decided that these are the communities we're going to hold at our center. And to be clear, once you look at the map, you'll see that these are large swaths of Black and Brown BIPOC communities in Chicago. So I don't want to give the impression that we are just focusing all the resources on like 2 blocks. These are unfortunately like large swaths of the city that have just been overlooked and neglected and intentionally divested in for decades. And so we've decided to hold them at the center and the central part of our investment mission. I hope that answers your question, Sarah. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Lolly, for directly addressing the question in the chat in the Q&A section. And thank you for those who participated through that tool today. I think we're going to close out maybe with just a brief response, if you're open to it, from each of you to a question that I'm holding as we look forward. But that also requires us to look back. Y'all know that. How are each of you seeking to be conduits of advancing anti-racism in 2021? And what is that going to require you to let go of as a result? So what are you letting go of? And what are you bringing forward as conduits of advancing anti-racism?
Well, I'll admit for me, letting go of anti-racism has meant really interrogating some of my own biases, some of the characteristics and responses that have been communicated to us from a white supremacist model to communicate certain things. And you guys have heard me talk about this before, about what I learned from a Brittany Cooper TED Talk about time and how we measure time and how we use time as an oppressive tool. And so we want to dictate that an organization should complete this by this time, or that this should be finished by this time. And so as I interrogate my own individual practices, being a lot more conscious of how I use time as a gift versus a weapon.
Ooh wee, wow, Lolly, wow. This is Tempest. I would agree with that, actually. I think for me too, it's really about understanding that this, again, this kind of points to something Lolly said earlier, but the world that we imagine that's more just and just more liberatory and where we're all taken care of and have what we need is a world that we're not in. So for me, being able to understand and keep learning about the ways and the thinking that's happening, the ideas as they evolve, and being able to continue to bring that into my own work and use that as a way of interrogating my practices is really important. I think also being able to understand the complexity of these things, to understand that anti-racism isn't the same as anti-Blackness, or like these types of things, like being anti-racist doesn't mean that you're not anti-Black. So there are different ways in which we need to understand the nuances of this work and pull that forward. So to me, it's also letting go of the thought that our knowledge is finite, or that we can ever get to a place of truly fully understanding all of these things, and that it is a constantly evolving process to improve, just strengthen our own thinking and infuse it into this work and unravel and disrupt the different things that have, have led to some of the very racist and harmful systems that we have, through our work at Field and through all of the work that we do, we're trying to battle against.
Again, Tempestt and Lolly, thank you so much for your generosity today and also for lifting up the names of so many incredible organizations in your community. I'm looking forward to going and checking out some myself. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisette to close us out. Thank you again. Be well.
Well, thank you, everyone. I had told you all that this was one of my favorite things that I get to do. And again, reminded why it's one of my favorite things that I get to do. So thank you all for your brilliance and your wisdom and for the wisdom of all the people that you mentioned today.